Mahmoud Ahmadinejad holds to a political and religious ideology that needs to be for his own actions and for the actions of the regime which he represents. For example, he recently has spoken on several occasions about human rights abuses in the West, most of them more fictional than fact. Not all of them, but most of them. Even in the United Nations, the Islamic Republic of Iran has registered complaints about human rights abuses, particularly concerning Muslims in France and elsewhere in Europe. In the Islamic Republic of Iran right now, there are 8 women awaiting death by stoning for the crime of adultery. In the Islamic Republic of Iran right now, there are 8 women. The 8th was sentenced just last week. A young mother, sentenced to death for adultery by stoning. You never hear the leaders of the Islamic Republic discussing or even manifesting any willingness to discuss the ideology that underlies this, because they believe that this ideology is founded in divine revelation and thus cannot be questioned, cannot be possibly ever subjected to critical scrutiny. But as the Byzantine emperor said so long ago, and as the Pope said last year, to convince a reasonable soul, one does not need a strong arm, or weapons of any kind, or any other means of threatening a person with death. It's the same thing, even internally in Iran, with this kind of coercive law that violates so many principles that are universally accepted around the world, or almost universally accepted, as being intrinsic to the rights of every individual. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, promulgated by the United Nations in 1948, guarantees the equality of rights of all people, regardless of gender, regardless of creed. It guarantees the freedom of conscience, the right to change one's religion or to have no religion at all, to discard one's religion. Now, of course, this goes against some very deeply held principles in the Islamic tradition. Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, said, if anybody changes his religion, kill him. That is a hadith recorded by Bukhari in several places. It has become, unfortunately, a foundation of Islamic law that's taught by all the schools of Islamic jurisprudence, that a male who is of the age of reason or has passed puberty, if he leaves Islam, is subject to death. The idea enshrined in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the freedom of conscience is rooted in the principle of the equality of dignity of all people and of the value of the human person. That is fundamentally a Judeo-Christian principle that comes from the idea of all human beings being created in the image of God, as taught in the Bible. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, this and many other principles enunciated by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were challenged by Sheikh Sultan Hussein Tabande in an Islamic critique of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, published in 1970, in which he said that a avowal of the freedom of conscience is obviously a denial of the express wishes of Muhammad, and Muhammad as Uswa Hasana, the supreme excellent example of conduct, as articulated by the Quran in chapter 30, verse 21, his words were normative in this and could not be questioned. Now here we have two competing principles. How are we going to determine how we can live together with these principles, or which one is going to take precedence? We cannot not do that except through a rational dialogue, a reasoned discussion without coercion or force. Now, of course, this is a very vexed thing, because if coercion and force are precisely what is directed, what one believes to be directed, then it becomes very difficult to maintain this kind of dialogue. But this is the choice, this is the dilemma that we face in the world today. 138 Muslim scholars from around the world representing every sect, every school of jurisprudence, every group, within Islam, writing to the Pope and to a large number of other Christian leaders, and appealing for peace, saying the future of the world, the peace of the world, depends upon us being able to get along as Muslims and Christians, because together we comprise, what was it, almost half of the world's population. And together, if we cannot get along, thus the world will be plunged into chaos. Now, this was a very welcome statement, and one that represents perhaps a different spirit, and just the kind of spirit of dialogue that we need to have. Unfortunately, it did not touch upon, and I would have liked to have seen it touch upon, some of the teachings of the Quran and of Islamic tradition about perhaps the Sunni tradition, the return of Jesus when he will break all the crosses and Islamize the world. Or the idea in chapter 5 verse 17 of the Quran that Christians are unbelievers if they believe in the deity of Christ. Or that they are under the curse of Allah in chapter 9 verse 30 of the Quran for believing in Jesus as the Son of God. Now, of course, these are statements that can be subject to a variety of interpretations, a variety of understandings, but we cannot possibly achieve a reasonable dialogue and come to some kind of a common understanding unless they are discussed openly and honestly, without the vilification of one party or another, just for bringing them up. And so the fanatical intransigence in some that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and his regime represent, and that many others around the world represent today, including Mohammed Bouyeri, the murderer of Theo Van Gogh, that is what is the primary enemy of every human being, Muslim and non-Muslim, today who wishes to live in peace with his neighbors and wishes to achieve some kind of a foundation by which we can possibly have a harmonious coexistence of people of conscience who in all good faith come to differing views of the world. This cannot possibly happen unless we heed the Pope's call in the Regensburg Address for reason and rational dialogue, or unless we listen to Theo Van Gogh in his last words, as ironic as they were at the occasion, when he said, "Can't we talk about this?" So, if we are going to understand that to convince a reasonable soul, one does not need strong arm or weapons of any kind, or any other means of threatening a person with death, to conduct the genuine dialogue of cultures and religions that is so urgently needed today, and which underlies the conflict between the United States and Iran, we have to be honest and engage not just in criticism of others, not just in shouting slogans and calling for other people to be silenced. Discussion, even when that discussion must touch upon unpleasant aspects of one's own tradition. For dialogue to be fruitful, for dialogue to be even possible in any genuine sense, both parties have to respect one another enough to lay aside cant and sloganeering and deal with one another honestly and forthrightly. I would hope to see this dialogue come to pass. I don't any longer have high hopes for it at this point. Can we talk about this? Maybe we can, but one side can't do all the talking or all the listening. The West is still looking for a force in the Islamic world with the courage, with the generosity of spirit, with the openness of intellect, and the foresight to be a worthy partner in this dialogue. Thank you very much.